going to start now, and I want to introduce myself. I'm Jeffrey Krellinston. I'm publisher and CEO of Research Money, and I want to welcome all of you to Quantum Tech Today and Tomorrow, Building on UK-Canada Partnership. That's our webinar. We're going to be here for an hour, and I want to thank our webinar partner, the UK High Commission in Ottawa. Without them, we couldn't have had this. Now, I want to remind all of you that this is being recorded, and a video of the session will be available tomorrow on the Research Money YouTube channel. We're also giving it to the UK High Commission in Ottawa, and they'll be distributing it. Feel free to use the chat. There'll be some announcements there. You can use it, but use the Q&A tab to post your questions to the panelists. So our moderator today is Dr. Barry Sanders, Scientific Director at Quantum City in Calgary, Alberta. Say hi, Barry. Let's wave.
Hello, everyone.
Okay, good. And our panelists are Dr. Stephanie Simmons, Founder and Chief Quantum Officer at Photonic, Inc., and she's also co-chair of the Advisory Board to Canada's National Quantum Strategy. Give us a wave, Steph.
Hello.
Okay. And Sir Peter Knight is chair of the UK National Quantum Technology Program Strategy Advisory Board. Peter, say hi.
Hi, folks.
Okay, now I'm going to let Barry take over now, and I'll come back at the end to close the session. So over to you, Barry. I'm going to disappear.
Okay, thanks very much, Jeff. And thanks to Peter and Steph for joining this, and also thanks to all of you in the audience for participating. And I hope we have a very informative and exciting event. What we'll do, we'll give each of the two speakers 10 minutes to talk about quantum technology in the UK-Canada context. And then after that, I'll ask some questions to each of them, and then I'll pass it over to the audience so you have plenty of time to ask about what you care most about. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Sir Peter for 10 minutes.
Thanks, Barry. Quantum technology is a major program in the UK. And I'm going to start by saying quantum technology does not always equal quantum computing. There's a whole raft of other things that it involves. So quantum computing is the one that makes all the headlines. But in addition to that, there's quantum-enabled sensing, timing, communication, and so on. In the UK, we've had a coordinated program. We're in our 10th year of that one. And we focused on those four areas of quantum-enabled communication, quantum sensing and timing, quantum computing and simulation, and quantum imaging. And so looking at all of that program, we're coming to the end of our current 10-year program, and we would have spent about £1 billion altogether on that, £1 billion UK pounds. But what we have done is to work out ways in which we'll extend that journey for a further 10 years with a further commitment of a further 2.5 billion from the UK government. So it really enabled us to actually expand the activity, to start thinking about scale and so on. Now, the journey we've been on is a really important journey where we knew that we got really great science in the university base and so on, but we wanted to work out how we could foster an entrepreneurial spirit to move that really great science into products of economic significance. So working with industry, working in ways in which we can encourage startups, all of that kind of activity. So in the first 5 years of our program, we were just building the idea of networks. How do you work together for the common good? The second part of it, the biggest single part of our program, was industry-led challenge funds. Okay, and that industry-led challenge, I think, has been a notable part of it. So as well as the money we've invested with taxpayers' money, we've also encouraged the investment by industry itself. I think that's really quite important in that partnership. So that's where we are at the moment. We have these research hubs, which are headquarters for the coordination of the research work. It involves about 30 universities, a lot of government departments, about 100 companies. The next phase of this program, I think, is going to be really important for us to see how we can start working at scale. And I think that's where we're focusing very much on things called quantum missions. Now, of course, when working with politicians, often the vocabulary changes overnight, and it may end up as a moonshot tomorrow. It was a moonshot last week, for example, and it's a mission now. And what they are attempts to try to work out ways in which we can start to do stuff at scale. So we've started with 5 missions, some of them with quite a lot of ambition, high risk, high return. So in particular, one of them is to build a quantum error corrected machine capable of generating outcomes of societal value. Now that's quite a stretch. Okay. Also, we're looking at ways in which we would build quantum networks. And I'm trying desperately and failing to stop it being called the quantum internet. Okay. It really is quantum networking. A third one is position navigation and timing, where quantum will really be the enabler. The fourth on this one is how quantum sensing will materially affect healthcare. We've got a number of developments which have proved quite radical in the way that we can do diagnostics, we can look at treatment and so on, and especially, for example, brain imaging. And then the final one is the wider quantum sensing and imaging side, where we're looking at ways in which, if you like, civil infrastructure is improved by that. Now, they're going to be our big missions, and we will invest, as I said, a further 2.5 billion of taxpayers' money. The contribution from industry will continue to grow. So the ratio of company money that we spent versus company money that they spent was about a ratio of 3 to 1, 3 times more from industry than we spent. That journey will continue, I think. Right. And then the final part of all this is we need to work really hard on skills. Where do you get people from? You know, it is an emerging technology, and getting people into the field, it's a hugely exciting field, is going to be quite a challenge as it all ramps up. A further part of it is to make sure that we can work with our close friends and allies around the world, and working out ways in which we can partner. And I know we're going to cover it in a moment later on. The ways in which we can collaborate. Often one signs memorandum of understanding or statements of intent with countries around the world. Often they sit on shelves and nothing much happens to them. But with the UK-Canada one, we worked out ways in which we could jointly fund pilot projects. And I think that's the seed for which we can actually build upon. And I think that the rest of our international engagement would learn a great deal from the collaboration we have in place with Canada. So that's the ecosystem we're on. I think it's going to be transformative, but as I say, it's not equal to quantum computing. That's an important part of it. Okay, I think that's my 10 minutes up, Barry.
Yeah, it's less than 10, but we can pass over and give you more airtime later if you like. Okay, so we'll go over to Steph.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for either dialing in or watching this after and recording. And thank you very much both to Barry and Peter, and especially to Peter showing up while just being diagnosed with COVID. I think it's a remarkable commitment to the quantum to the quantum challenge. In some sense, I'm personally, individually, a product of Canada's very early engagement into quantum. And I think what I love about this conversation here is that we're talking about the UK and Canada and how we can work together. And actually, we've been orbiting / working / melding as ecosystems, quantum ecosystems, for 20 years, right? So there's very few countries got engaged 20 years ago and got engaged in a very committed way. There's some very early work, obviously, done in the UK in the 80s and in the 90s. Canada got engaged with serious investment from very future-focused individuals back 20 years ago. So really, we are now, it won't be surprising to those listening in that how similar our ecosystem and strategies are, because we've kind of come to the same conclusions, although I think the UK is a little bit ahead of us in some ways. So we'll speak to a bit of that, but those are my own personal opinions. So yes, I was very fortunate to have been named the co-chair of Canada's National Quantum Strategy, where we are providing feedback to the government on what the next phase of Canada's National Quantum Strategy will be. It's basically been inspired over the past little while to even have a strategy. It was very much inspired by some of the work that Peter and Al did back about 10 years ago. And so Canada heard that messaging from the Canadian science and industry side and wanted to get going. Fortunately, Canada's in a really strong position, because not only did we get started on the research side really early, but we got started on the commercialization side really early too. So we have actually quite a considerable, some major heavyweights from an industrial side, as well as on an academic side. So we have about 4 major hubs academically in Alberta, in BC, and in Ontario, and in Quebec. And the National Quantum Strategy at the moment, I think the Canadian National Quantum Strategy is much more important for the trajectory that it's setting rather than the numbers. But the numbers actually don't line up so differently. In the past 10 years, Canada has spent at least $1 billion in quantum science between 2012 and 2022. The National Quantum Strategy package itself was $360 million invested over 7 years in an allocation that was set out before the advisory council was able to advise on it. So it was really kind of structured and like, okay, let's make sure everything is sufficiently covered, because what we have here is special. And what I mean by I mean the quantum ecosystem, the international quantum ecosystem. We're at a very interesting turning point where we're commercializing essentially a branch of physics. And every single time, and that's, I think, why the UK and Canada have gotten involved so early and why they're taking it so seriously, is that the UK has the benefit of seeing this having happened about 4 or 5 times, commercializations of various branches of physics. But every time you do that, it ends up being the platform that shifts so much of human experience. And we know that when we can target for specific applications, many of which were named by Peter there, once we deliver that value, that is just the first step in unleashing the full branch of quantum physics for commercial and societal value, right? This has always been the case. There's always like 1 or 2 first early steps. Once that clicks in, then the excitement abounds and then things spiral out. So we're really excited to be at that tipping point where we're not just needing to invest in the research, but as Peter mentioned, think very seriously about focusing efforts to deliver useful tools for everyone. And those run the gambit from computing, yes, networks, yes, and sensors, yes. But I believe that there's going to be combinations thereof that actually unleash the most value in due course. And so that is something that is seen as a common central objective. I might not be able to use the word moonshot yet, but this common central objective. And almost a consolidation. So one of the things that I've seen within the space, seen within academia and within the industrial sector, which I'm very fortunate to have a deep connection to both, is that there's this merger that we're talking about, this end goal of large scale systems where we're essentially merging the network ability of computing, right? So taking computing and networks and thinking about how those networks enable sensors, putting all these together, there's a lot of convergence in the on the horizon. And so working towards that, I think, is going to be a common objective across the broader ecosystem, trying to unleash scale. And the reason why scale matters is that's where the value we can point to. we can write out the number of qubits and the quality of those qubits and the quality of the entanglement that's needed to deliver value. And so scale is really when we unlock the most of that. So we have within the National Quantum Strategy, we're not quite in a fully merged setting there. I think that's kind of a forecast. Our current pillars are really on the computing, networking, and sensing. And overall, I do think it's an improvement to call it networking. I completely agree with you, Peter. It's a networking thing rather than communications or internet, because really what you'll see is that a lot of this comes down to how can you use entanglement, right? How can you distribute and consume intelligently the really non-classical, the new physics here that gives us new capabilities, and that is entanglement. So we're going to have, I think, me just stepping aside with the National Quantum Strategy hat for a second, I do think there's going to be 3 phases of quantum technology development. The first, the current phase, where we're playing with small scale systems and we're taking a look at things that might not be possible to be done with classical techniques, but still not maybe unleashing value for humans. Phase 2, where we have some degree of error correction and fault tolerance, and we're really entering into that wonderful world. Honestly, it's been 20 years. I was just a youngling 20 years ago, and it was just seen as like this mysterious, far off future thing that maybe fault tolerance one day will be achieved. And we're starting to see that now, which is very exciting. And it's exactly according to the models that theorists have been working on for 20 years. So thank you, theorists. But I think phase 3 is going to be, at scale, when this is really delivering value. And we're going to see that through, I believe, a networked approach. So that is going to be, I think, the trajectory that we're taking technologically as a society. I do think, as a quantum society, I absolutely agree with what Peter's been sharing, and that the trajectory is working together more. Really just coming up with, really converging on a set of what matters, because right now you could, if you ask what matters, you can get a different answer from almost everybody in the community. Getting convergence on like what matters, working together so we're all rowing the boat in the same direction, and getting really in front of user value, which is not, it's a shift away from the scientific flag waving, but I think that's what's really going to lead into way more investment, which is what Peter was mentioning, getting a lot of co-investment and getting further opportunities for scientific flag waving and then future value as well. So there will be that kind of push. And I think that's one of the best opportunities to have conversations like these, because when we have alignment on not just what needs doing, but how to get there, and have a view of how we can both benefit by working together and not siloing too early, I think that can go a long way to unleashing these tools to the greater good as soon as we possibly can. So I also agree that our MRU is really focused on the right things, and I think that it's a really good model. So also I agree on that front, and I also think that in due course, the National Quantum Strategy, the Canadian National Quantum Strategy, will move from this more bottom-up approach where, that $360 million is allocated across, there's 138 million to all the different research hubs, including all kinds of alliance programming where you're actually encouraging engagement between researcher and industry. There's $70 million to the regional economic development that are focused really on the industrial side. We have over $50 million to the NRC to think about its sensors challenge that's more towards their growth aspirations, but taking all of that and then really summarizing it to exactly a moonshot, right? What are the 3 most important things? I like it. I like the term moonshot, so I don't know if I'm going to be allowed to use it in due course, but I do see that is going to be a shift that the Canadian ecosystem goes with, from instead of a supply into a much more demand side system. How do we really focus in on exactly what matters and take that forward in terms of future investments within the Canadian ecosystem? So it's going to be a really interesting ride, because of course the most of the quantum community is academic, but I think that actually might be shifting. I think if you tallied it up, it's probably 50-50 now in terms of industry versus academia. So in terms of research, actually, there's as much of research happening in industry now as there is within academia. So it's a fantastic time to be part of it. And it's really fantastic to be in a country that not only recognizes strong relationships with other like-minded countries that want the same good, but also are focused on bringing it together with urgency. So you had your hand there raised, Barry. Am I done?
We're at 10 minutes. If you want to
that was the end. So it's great to be part of a country that's taking it seriously, because there's a lot. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, both of you. It's a really exciting introduction to the field. I want to ask a question which is more of a primer. So I'm guessing quite a few attendees aren't really so clear on what quantum technology is. So let me just pose the question this way. And so for me, as a quantum physicist myself, I think the whole universe is quantum. Therefore, all technology is quantum. So where do we draw the boundary? And then we also have older technologies like transistors, lasers, superconductors, magnetic resonance imaging that are quantum in some way. So I'll go to you, Steph, first. Could you, like, just briefly, you and then Peter, just explain what quantum technology is in a quantum universe?
That's a beautiful question. And actually, I love your example of MRIs, because I use that very frequently to explain like kind of the first baby steps into what this whole category looks like. You're right that quantum laws are what's given rise to most of the technologies in a limit sense to most of what we've seen. But what's really different about what we hope to achieve with quantum technologies is the ability to leverage quantum information for its information processing capabilities. And I would put MRI into that category. I would say that you use quantum information to deduce, and that's why it's the ultimate example is a quantum sensor to some level. But by making use of richer forms of information that do exist in nature, we could hope to, simulate nature with a tool that's fit for purpose. And at the moment, when we try to construct in this phase one era of quantum technologies and quantum information technologies, we're not able to do that with great accuracy because these systems don't allow for error correction. So you can't, past a certain point, trust the results. So having trustworthy quantum information processing will allow us to do a whole number of things, and way more than we've been able to articulate so far. I think it's really important to know that, whenever you unleash a branch of physics, you can't project what the next generation will see and combine these tools with and have other opportunities. But already, before we've put large-scale, reliable quantum information technologies on the ground, we have a laundry list of stuff we want to do, right? You go take a look at quantumalgorithmzoo.org. There's a whole bunch of different algorithms there that can't be done with classical information processing without having overheads that would take it beyond the lifetime of the universe, right? So these are, quantum information is just a different physical way of holding on to information, which is richer than can be done with classical systems.
So thanks, that's really clear. It's very much a quantum information oriented answer, and that's a very important direction. And I want to give you, Peter, a chance also to respond to the question and perhaps also address other aspects.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. It's nearly 100 years since quantum mechanics started, and quantum mechanics has enabled the whole technological world that we live in. It's lasers, semiconductors, superconductors, all of that sort of stuff is enabled by quantum. So what's new is what we're trying to do is to exploit the idea of coherence and of superposition, basically. This rather strange quantum property that you can put systems in a superposition simultaneously of this state and that state at the same time, and that gives you computational power eventually, but it's extremely fragile. So you turn that on its head and say that fragility is what we need in the sensor as well. So we're trying to exploit coherence basically and superposition. Entanglement is another part of this as well. So really the journey from the older quantum mechanics that enabled the technical world that we currently inhabit, and this new world that we're trying to spawn, that was enabled by the ability to manipulate quantum systems, individual quantum systems, to manipulate them, to create these strange superpositions, and demonstrate that their sensitivity is something you couldn't get from a normal classical machine, and that gives us capabilities that people might need. And of course, what we need to be able to do at the end of this journey is we build these capabilities. It comes in a box or a gizmo. You don't need to know what's in it. I mean, you don't know what's in your phone at the moment. Okay, you trust it. You know it does stuff. And before the cell phone, you couldn't do stuff. So with quantum machines, we're going to be able to do stuff that we couldn't do previously. But you better not need a PhD in quantum physics to know how it works or why it works or how to use it. Okay, so that's the journey we're on, exploiting these rather strange things like superpositions. And everybody on this call almost certainly has used a quantum superposition today because they've used GPS. A GPS is enabled by atomic clocks, and atomic clocks, you put these little tiny atoms in your atomic clocks into these superpositions. So it's not so strange. We gave it to you with GPS.
Great. Thank you very much, both of you. That helps elucidate a lot where quantum technology is. The next question is really, is the whole greater than the sum of the parts question? So you both talked about what Canada and the UK are doing, what the, that there have been some engagements between the two and how they're done. But, there are whatever, almost 200 countries in the world. You can think of every pairwise interaction. What is it that makes the UK-Canada link special, and what do we get from the two countries by working together we wouldn't get without? And I'll go to you first, Peter.
If you think about the talent base, where we've had a long history of collaboration between us, we have a common set of values, a lot of enthusiasm for doing stuff that I think will enable us just to get on and do it without having to build those relationships up. Those relationships already exist. People have worked in both countries, they know each other really well, they trust each other in the sense of values. So one of the things I'm sure we can do, for example, is to work on this whole outreach activity to enthuse the next generation that this is a wonderful thing to come and work in. The second thing we can do is to come up with really great ideas that will enable us to do stuff. For example, how about sharing entanglement across the Atlantic? Why not? Who would want it? Well, because you can link processes up that way. And that concept of doing something at scale right across the Atlantic between the UK and Canada is something we're seriously looking at. We funded a little bit of pilot scheme already jointly. And I think there's an appetite to demonstrate that we can do something in linking a quantum processor in the UK and a quantum processor in Canada. And there are reasons why you want to do that, by the way. But it would just be a wonderfully exciting thing to start with.
Thank you very much, Steph.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the interesting features of learning from history is that many countries have recognized that the commercialization of a branch of physics benefits the first movers disproportionately. And that's the insight that's given rise to the investment that Canada and the UK put in early, and they have benefited in the sense that the talent base here is very strong on both sides, and we speak each other's language from a technical standpoint and understand priorities from that perspective, and work really well because we kind of grew up together. But I would say that what I really like about pairwise relationships such as this is, yes, not only it's strong, and I completely agree with what Peter was sharing, is that it's also a good example to set for all the other countries that we want to join in, like-minded countries that have the same kind of objectives when we think about a dual-use technology like this. And if we can all see the benefit in not siloing, then we collectively have a stronger position in that broader race and the broader beneficiaries. So I think that could really go a long way, because if we don't double down on collaboration, we could have a situation where everybody tries to do it all entirely themselves. And not only is that clearly wasted work and duplication of effort, but it also, I think, puts us at a competitive disadvantage compared to some others that would, then it's really just a rich get richer and everybody else is a have-not situation. So I think there is a lot of opportunity to set the right tone, and especially during this transition period, and understanding, hey, these relationships make a lot of sense. Let's not take 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
And I think also looking at ways in which the two countries can start looking at global challenges that affect people's lives. Let me give you a little example. A spin-out from the University of Nottingham has worked out how to do functional brain imaging using a thing like a cycle helmet. And it suddenly proves new capabilities to look at functional brain imaging in the treatment of juvenile epilepsy. Okay. Right, so they built the prototype machine. Where was it initially tested? Sick kids in Toronto. Okay, so there's a long history of understanding what we can do and then field testing it to see if it makes a difference. And remember, that same brain imaging will also enable us to actually start looking at dementia and a third of us are going to worry about dementia at some point. And so that kind of joint activity, Sick Kids in Toronto and the physicists at the University of Nottingham, it's already being used by surgeons. I think that's a wonderful example. That's how fast that one developed in 3 years.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to ask one more question, then I'll start taking questions from the chat or audience question asking. So the next one is, it's the opportunity threat question. So we know that quantum technologies globally is subject to security oversight. There are examples where quantum can thrive under agreements like AUKUS, the Australia, UK, US agreement. There's questions about the benefits of open collaboration versus the threat side. So it's kind of open in that way, but I'll go to you, Steph, first, and maybe just talk about the opportunity threat and the security lens on the field. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So that's such an important question, because this is one of the applications of quantum computing, large-scale quantum computing, that have been developed the most. So for those of you dialing in who aren't familiar, modern cryptographic systems rely upon either Diffie-Hellman or RSA-based cryptography, and quantum computers will be able to eat them for lunch. And that includes like Bitcoin and all the rest of them. So it's going to be a transition period for sure when we shift from, let's say, old school cryptography to new forms of cryptography that are going to be secure against quantum computers' computational capabilities. But this, I think it's really important that we recognize this will be a transition, right? It'll be a transition, and at some point we're going to all settle on something new, and then it won't necessarily be considered such a dual use technology. And one of the things I'm most proud of is within the National Quantum Strategy, there's been this very central focus on this shift to a post-quantum cryptography scenario, which could have hardware or software components. And frankly, I'm one of the believers that will probably won't have both to some degree. And now the hardware would be a quantum network of some description. Post-quantum cryptography is using other math that might be resilient. So I think that it's really important to make it clear to everybody that, that it'll take a while to do this transition. And if we do focus on getting that in early, then we don't have to have this kind of threat opportunity conversation as a dual use. The only threat opportunity conversation to be had is economic. And of course, economic gains can definitely propagate very quickly, even outside the countries where they're necessarily initiated, right? There's going to be a giant productivity boost for all these other technologies, including AI, that are coming up today. That can propagate across the wider world very quickly, and we can all benefit from these economic gains. And I'm hoping quantum can take that same lens. But that only exists if we really double down on the shift away from classical cryptography into something that's more quantum secure. So fortunately, yeah, there's a lot of focus being happening right there, as well as international standards. So there's a lot of standards agreement that's happening between the UK, the US, Canada, Five Eyes more broadly, but across the broader world on how to think about standards to obviate or at least mitigate the damage done by that particular application of quantum computing. Now, of course, all technologies to some level are dual use. If you have the ability to very accurately simulate chemical and material systems, you can still apply that to nefarious aims. But I think it's one of the situations where that's less so, where it was much more of an opportunistic sense, using a technology in that way. So that's how I'm seeing it at the moment. And I think it really just comes down to making sure we have mutual agreements and controls of these technologies as they come up, and thinking very carefully about who has access to the earliest ones.
Thank you. And Peter, your response?
Yeah, it's going to be really easy to strangle quantum technology by putting in inappropriate regulations on where you can move stuff around. And so making sure that we have an ability to work with like-minded friends is really important. And what we're seeing is some relatively naive constraints on that ability to do stuff at the moment. And of course, what they're doing is they're modifying the Wassenaar agreements on the ability to export to and fro, and that is perfectly sensible if there's an agile licensing system which will enable exports to friendly countries. And so there's a lot of work underway at the moment to ensure that we all line up together. So last week, UK Parliament passed a whole set of export regulation restrictions, which are going to need licenses. France did exactly the same the week before. Spain has also done the same. There's something going through the US at the moment, although I think that the major companies like Google and Intel and IBM are likely to object. But that kind of restriction at a too early stage, without the agile ability to put licenses in, means that you'll strangle the technology. Because for this to work, we've got to move from proof of principle to doing something useful and then have a market to sell it. Okay, so for example, here's a naive one, that we will prohibit to any destination the transport or transfer by electronic means, notice that, electronic means, of the following goods. Okay, quantum computers supporting 34 or more fully controlled connected qubits. Now, come on. So, naivety and working out how we can work out ways in which, with trusted friends around the world, we can do this is important. So, we've done a lot of work on, what are we supposed to do on regulations and standards for quantum? Now we've got to work out how to work on trust.
Great responses. Okay, I'm going to go to the audience questions now. So I see them in the question part of the webinar. So the first question that I see is, I interpret it to be a materials/components question. And so the question is, to what extent do you see compound semiconductors using light or lasers to enable quantum connectivity, including moving data within a quantum computer? So I'd like to interpret the question a little more broadly. So it's asking about compound semiconductors and their role, but I guess a broader question would be related to the overlap between materials and quantum technologies. So I'd like to interpret in that way. And then I think, Steph, you went first last time, so I'll go to Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we do need is to look at ways in which, when we build any sort of quantum processor, the way we move the information around, we link it up with classical processors, we interpret the results, we correct the errors. Interoperability is going to be really important. A lot of the compound semiconductor side of things is simply that we're going to need light sources. We're going to need light sources to move stuff around. We're going to need integrated optics to do stuff properly. And so it's not enough just to have a quantum strategy. You need to have a compelling semiconductor strategy at the same time, which links them together. And that's quite difficult at the moment. So that's part of that. Basically, we're going to end up in a situation where we have moving bits of quantum information and stationary bits of quantum information, and interfacing them is really important. And the whole semiconductor business will tell us how to do that.
Thank you. And Steph, over to you.
Oh, it's almost unfair Peter set me up like that. So I believe in this very strongly. This has been the major lesson that I have learned in my 20 years in quantum technology, is that the ability to, if I were to take and summarize it, the most important thing to delivering customer value is entanglement distribution. And being able to get entanglement where it needs to be to build a large scale system, right, to do all of these applications, all to do these large scale networks, or to really make the most of these sensors. It really just comes down to that element. And if you work backwards from that, entanglement distribution works really, really well when you have a light source and when you can connect it to something with memory. Now, I do believe it's an open question to some level whether or not that matter-based object is in a vacuum tube to some level or a solid state. If it is going to be solid state for longevity purposes and mean time to failures, then yes, semiconductors are the way to go, because that is the industry standard for not just light production, but also light redirection and manipulation. And the quality of that light and keeping that nice and beautiful photon nicely entangled with what it needs to be entangled with is a matter of materials. It's a matter of understanding just the minute aspects that are introduced into any of these materials. And it connects to the previous conversation too, because some of those materials are already now controlled. Now these things are under export control because some materials offer better quantum characteristics than others. And so much so that various governments have decided to put all kinds of export controls on them. But I'll tell you, once you get a means to Like there are entire adversarial organizations out there. Their entire business model is just to hack into things and take resources, and some of those resources are considerable now that are being their only barricade. It is one of these cryptographic standards that, you know, there's no patch to some of these ones. So there will be, once the blueprint is out there and the materials exist, or at least the blueprint to create said materials, there will be a race that goes on that we have to make sure that we're not, yes, I agree with Peter, not strangling our own competitive advantage in that. And one of them is to really just start restricting the movement of not just people, but yeah, materials, just really, really basic core material physics. But yeah, it'll be an interesting one to play out. And I think it's important that we have intelligent decision making at the table and not just reactionary, right? So it's really important to have these things well informed by the communities that are engaged, because I think we can eat our cake and have it too in this circumstance.
Excellent. Thank you very much. The next question from the audience is posed as, what has been the sharing IP approach from co-innovation under the Canada-UK quantum MOU? So we've talked about protecting and export controls and that. So this is quite specific about what is the approach between Canada and the UK to ensure IP can flow. And I'll go to you first, Steph.
Oh, well, Peter's already answered. Go for it,
Oh,
Peter.
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what we've funded so far in the joint projects between the UK and Canada, they involve consortia, and the consortia put together an approach to do something. And as a condition of getting the joint support, they have to come with a prior agreement on their IP handling. Okay, and if they don't do that, they're not eligible for funding. So, for example, one of the bigger joint projects is between Xanadu in Canada and Rolls-Royce in the UK, to actually look at ways in which software and algorithms can improve the aircraft engines. Now, this is something which is extremely sensitive in terms of IP. So Xanadu and Rolls-Royce got together ahead of time to work out how they would control their joint IP development and protection. And that's true of all of the consortia. So we facilitate in consortia building, but we put down a condition saying we're not sorting out your IP agreement, you are.
I would just double down and say this is really, really important, because what you can get if you construct these kinds of programs badly is mandatory IP arrangements that have a particular flavor. And that is just as destructive as export controls, because honestly, if you have the wrong IP in a small startup that's trying to go and secure additional investment, that can have giant red flags for any investors that go into it. So it's really important that that the IP side is taken quite seriously, but also in a circumstance specific way, so that each of the organizations have the ability to design it in a way that makes sense for them and what they need to achieve.
Great, thanks. Okay, the next question I'll just summarize, but I think it's been answered. And it's about the Council of Canadian Academies report that talks about the Canada lagging in developing and deploying quantum tech. And then the question was, how is the UK-Canada quantum partnership helping to get quantum out of the lab and into commercialization and products that people want? So I think it's been substantially answered. Okay, if either of you want to jump in and comment, it's welcome. Otherwise, I'll go on.
I would love to.
Go ahead, then.
This is the one where just me speaking, Steph Simmons. Okay, I'm not with no hats, just me, Steph Simmons. I absolutely adore the move from the demand side to supply side mentality, or sorry, from the supply side to the demand side mentality that the UK's gone. Like, there's a shift that needs to happen when you move from research to development, where you're actually trying to drive towards specific outcome. And that's what commercialization is. It's driving to specific outcomes with metrics, usually commercial metrics. And so these moonshots, I think, is absolutely the way to go. Because if you can attach specific procurement and have a procurement first mentality, which the UK has done tremendous work shifting into that mentality, which is hard for the ecosystem where it came from to think about this in a procurement setting. It is absolutely the best way to align towards specific outcomes. And I think that's going to be a great shift that we could move to within the Canadian ecosystem to benefit from the great thinking that's already been underway across the Atlantic.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if I could add to that, Barry, the procurement is really important for companies to survive that early stage. You can make as many joint grants as you like with companies, but what really affects the bottom line is someone buying something from them. So one thing we've done is we bought 5 quantum computing test beds from emergent companies, early stage quantum computing test beds, so that we can actually kick the tires and benchmark them. That procurement, I mean, it's a ludicrous statement to make government an agile procurer, but we are trying.
And I'd say just the really beautiful example there is that it's not procured with the objective of actually, in the first instance, delivering value. It's procuring the roadmap towards the big thing that actually then has enough value that it will fund itself, right? Like that's the whole point. It's getting through that gap.
Yeah, and don't forget, you need an industrial capability that can pick it up and run with it. You can't build industrial capability of that scale, and that's where Canada and the UK have a commonality of their industrial ecosystem. Every people that know me know what I'm going to say next. Photonics in the UK generates a little bit more for the GDP of the nation than pharmaceuticals. It's in 1,600 companies, and it's a major success story. Photonics is equally strong in Canada as well, with all sorts of things going. So, in other words, there's an industry just waiting to run with this stuff, and you can then exploit it. So it's not a matter of persuasion, but of partnership.
Excellent. Okay, thanks. The next question, it says PCQ, but I'm going to interpret that as PQC, which stands for post-quantum crypto. So the question, the question is posed as follows. It says, if we will only get either post-quantum crypto or quantum hardware, so I guess it's posing a choice, how can quantum hardware compete? Post-quantum crypto being software is easier and less expensive to roll out. Is it that important to have security through physics instead of through mathematics? So the way I interpret the question, it addresses the threat side of quantum computing, and the security side presents a dichotomy of post-quantum crypto versus quantum hardware, and which one is better is how I see the question.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in first on that one, but if you don't mind, Steph.
Go for it. We'll say the same thing anyway, I'm sure. Go ahead.
It is really important that we don't put all our eggs in one basket when we look at the way in which we can secure communications. Post-quantum cryptography is sometimes called quantum safe. It isn't quantum safe. What they mean by that is that they know of no algorithm currently that can attack it. Okay, so there are no security proofs on post-quantum cryptography. There's just an optimization, an optimism that it's not going to be affected by Grover's algorithm or Shor's algorithm. On the other hand, there's some reluctance on the hardware on QKD to actually see that one rolled out. I believe it's much too early to put all eggs in one basket. One needs to propel both together. And of course, what we will see is attack vectors on the various post-quantum or quantum safe encryption anyway. So it's really important that we actually have a dual approach to this one and encourage research on both to make sure that we haven't really stumbled down a blind alley. That's my personal view.
Thank you, Peter. And Barry, I trust you'll let me have a go.
Of course.
I absolutely agree with every single word that Peter said. And the other sentence I will add to that is we have to migrate to layered post-quantum cryptography now anyway. Like we have to do it. We have to do it, even with the fact that it hasn't been stress tested for 40 years. And they will have almost certainly not just side attacks, but principal attacks on either lattice or hash. There's only major like 2 categories that people are really thinking about in this standardization approach. The lattice-based cryptography approaches or these hash-based approaches, one or both of them may fall, and that's fine. We can still, it's still important to get it over, because at the moment, the quantum networks challenge is an infrastructure challenge, and the last mile challenge on that is astronomical, right? So we have to do it. We have to do it and have a kind of security through obscurity situation where we're relying upon that. And frankly, not even when I mean a hardware approach, I don't even mean just quantum networks. Honestly, going back to one-time pads, like literally USB keys of zeros and ones can go a long way on the last mile challenge if needed, right? If we really have a challenge with lattice or hash. But I wanted to just be like really upfront. I think it's really important that we think very, very carefully about layering not just RSA and Diffie-Hellman, which have stood the test of time, right? So far against classical attack. Layer in something for critical infrastructure, at a minimum, layer in the post-quantum algorithms like lattice and hash that will help, and physical security for ones where you really can't take a risk, because the physics security is in some sense, I don't like using the word provable, but you can provably detect eavesdropping. Like that's what it protects against. So you can protect against the fact that those keys were distributed securely. And, you know, you can have briefcases of zeros and ones if you're really paranoid. So like we have to have this layered approach. And so I love the question because I love to reject the premise. Like I really think it's really distracting and almost unhelpful to try and have an A versus B conversation about these kinds of security techniques. It's not like you'd have those kinds of conversations with any other kind of security. Like you still have a password on your phone and you'll lock your house, right? You're going to have security layers. This is just a human experience. So we should really be thinking about where we can not afford not to invest in infrastructure such as hardware, and how quickly we can add additional layers of security where we need to. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks. Okay, so we'll go for another 4 minutes. So I think I'll select a question in the list, and then I want to give each of you a chance to just wrap up, a couple of minutes each. And Jeff, I'm not sure if you want to step back in, but if you want to say something at the end, let me know. Okay, so I'm going to pick the question. There's one here that says, what are the panel's thoughts around international competitiveness and key challenges, competitors? So the way I interpret that question is kind of like, okay, so we understand better through the conversation how Canada and the UK can work well together. So it's a partnership, but there's other partnerships, there's other things going on. So where would this partnership stand relative to the activities in the world? How competitive could we be together? And I think I got to use Steph.
Yeah, sure. So just to kind of double down on one of the earlier points I made, I think good, strong relationships with like-minded organizations, we should just be doing that top to bottom, right? I think that this is one of these opportunities to, so long as we get in front of a cryptographic transition, get these tools out there, right? Like we have such an enormous, chemical challenge facing us in the atmosphere. We're going to need all the tools at our disposal to really help with reorienting everything to do with energy over the next, all the catalysts. We have no tools fit for purpose for actually simulating how catalysts work, which are changing one chemical to another or helping materials like generating even the chemicals that we're using from a pharmaceutical or medical. Like, I mean, there's just so much to do. We want to get these things out. We want to get these things like ready and consumable and distributed to all of the good actors that are out there, which are most of everybody, right? We don't need to be down about this. This is such an opportunity for us to be able to build these technologies that offer new capabilities, and we need to be doing it together. We should, like, there's no harm in making sure that we're not, we should not be reverting to childish sandbox things where everybody wants to own their part of the little, their own little sandcastle. There's no reason to do that, right? This is just an upside for everybody, so long as we can keep our eyes open and work smart, right? Let's work smart, let's work together. And so this is one example. This relationship is one example that I want to be replicated across lots of pairwise countries across, and we can all, join into consortia. We should have, to some level, an international quantum strategy where we're thinking about like a NATO level quantum strategy, which they do have a quantum strategy now. The Five Eyes are another example. Like there's lots of examples where, most of the world wants the right things here. So let's do it together, and let's not kill it too early through unnecessary regulation or export controls or the rest of it. We do want to, keep our eyes open because there are organizations that want to use it for bad things, but it shouldn't be done at the expense of using it for good. So let's just walk that line. Let's figure out a way to do that. And the more, the better.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I wanted to add one other part of it, which is patient investment, because one of the things we've done is create a really dynamic ecosystem of small medium enterprises, startups. They've done very well in venture capital funding, but eventually they need to step up to that next stage, and that next stage requires very considerable capital over a longer period. So patient capital is essential. Without it, what you will see is mergers and acquisitions into countries which have a much deeper pocket. So if you want to see Canada and the UK survive in this space, we need patient investment. Otherwise, all the really great ideas you'll go through proof of concept, and then you'll find in 10 years it's done somewhere else, because that's where the larger capital is. So patient capital is going to be really important as an international strategy to make sure that the originators of the work profit from their insights.
And the best patient capital is government. That's been like in human history, that's been the case. It's been
Well,
like coming up with.
except you've got a wonderful example in Canada of the reform to your pension scheme, so
Yes,
that you can invest in technology.
yes.
And we're looking at learning from the Canada experience in doing just the same.
Well, that's a really good point.
Okay, so we're in the last 3 minutes. So thanks. Jeff, did you want to say anything?
I want to close, but if you have, I want to give them their minute to
Yeah,
say their.
exactly. Okay, so I'll give each of them a last word, take-home message. So I'll go to you first, Peter. Just in a minute, what's the take-home message you want to send?
We've already demonstrated that quantum can provide transformative capabilities that people need. One thing that I'm absolutely sure about is we haven't yet thought of the really big applications, because they're going to come and surprise us. So watch this space. In 10 years, it will be something new and something different, building on the foundations we've laid.
Thanks. And Steph, your minute of thought?
Thank you so much. So yes, every time we commercialize a branch of physics, it does have this platform effect where it does shift in unexpected ways, as Peter mentioned, across all of human society in due course, but it doesn't happen overnight. But at the same time, the way to get that up and standing up is to procure that roadmap. Think about what we need to get between here and large scale commercial value, and procure exactly what needs to be done to deliver that, where it's then a self-fulfilling flywheel and can then unleash good on the world. So let's make that happen.
Well, this has been fantastic. You're all terrific. I want to thank Steph and Sir Peter and Barry. You did a brilliant moderation job. I want to thank the UK High Commission in Ottawa for coming up with the idea and recruiting Sir Peter, and we recruited Steph and Barry, and it was really great. I did ask, I want to tell people about our upcoming Research Money Annual Conference next April. Danielle will put a link to it. We're covering, how do we create the future we want for Canada in 15 years? I think quantum is going to be a big part of it. I do want to ask Steph and Peter the question that I had posted, because export controls, dumb IP mandates. What's the process that you're currently involved in Canada and the UK and together in talking to government about not making these strangling moves? I mean, how are you handling that? And do we need more expertise in government to be able to receive your advice, for example?
Yeah,
What mechanisms do you have to sort of mitigate this danger?
so firstly, on appropriate regulation and standards, the one thing we did is to build an arm's length non-governmental body that does represent views of industry, as well as people like IP lawyers, and it's called the Regulatory Horizons Council. And they produced a report a month ago about where it's inappropriate to intervene and where it's appropriate. And I think that's the first steps in terms of the regulation side of it. In terms of the export council side, export regulation side of this thing, that's where it's really important that we step up to use our ability to communicate with our political masters to demonstrate that there are unexpected consequences of things. And certainly many of us are doing that all the time.
Steph?
And I would, yeah, you're absolutely right. Those kinds of bodies exist, and fortunately, there is enough small amounts of spare bandwidth across the organization to be able to contribute to that meaningfully, and not just at the largest lobbying levels. But I think most importantly is just to acknowledge the win in having an advisory council to begin with, right? Like just having the ability to consult with government, because honestly, especially when it comes to deep tech, emerging tech, there's always a talent shortage in these sectors, which means that usually the compensation required to have the right people on staff isn't commensurate with usual government salaries, right? So having an arrangement where you can, but it's usually through you really do need to have those right voices connected to the right people within government that understand the policy side, but not necessarily the Hamiltonians. And so connecting these people together so that we can have these fruitful conversations and think about impacts together is just so important. And we're just so grateful. I'm just so grateful to be in a country where we even have that council, because not all do. So we're making good progress on that. Thank you.
You need to put the effort in to talk.
Yes.
So I'm in a couple of weeks, I'm in Downing Street. What we're going to be doing is taking Harrison's chronometer with us to demonstrate that an investment in decent clocks enabled world trade.
Wow.
Okay. And then the second part of it is quantum will be the next step on that journey. So, it's those kind of examples. So we'll take Harrison's H4 with us. It's first time it's ever been allowed out from Kew, and we'll see what we can do with it. So we'll see. But honestly, politicians are attracted by quantum. You've got a wonderful opportunity at the moment to make your voice heard, because we're going to transform the world.
On that note, I want to thank you again. That's a very positive note, which I like. And thanks so much. And Barry, thank you for the great moderation. And thank you, all of you, for participating. It was a great session. Thanks so much. Bye.